CPTSD, an acronym I had never heard of nor read about as an avid reader. So it was March 2023, and my psychiatrist had just told me that the symptoms I had described, I had been describing over the past, approximately 7 months, weren't in fact ADHD, but CPTSD. So CPTSD stands for Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So it is a severe form of PTSD. However, it's caused by ongoing traumatic events in childhood. It's not one event that causes it, but a series of events, over months or years. Its most common symptoms include emotional flashbacks, toxic shame, self-abandonment, a harsh inner critic, and social anxiety. And I recommend this book. This was the first book I read on CPTSD, and I will share more resources down below. Most of my symptoms, and symptoms that I exhibited, were actually emotional. Because the ongoing trauma could be emotional, physical, but or verbal. But for me, it was mostly emotional. Of course, they led to physical symptoms as well. Sometimes, I would throw up. I developed IBS, which was always triggered. I have IBS, which is triggered by stress, anxiety, and I had digestive issues, especially for my teen years. And as a child, I was always lethargic. Like, I just never had enough rest. And sometimes I feel like that too. And on the emotional side, I was sensitive to criticism. And, I always viewed it from the lens of rejection. I developed rejection sensitivity dysphoria. In a way, I would mask or hide my emotions. And sometimes I didn't even know what emotions I was feeling. I couldn't name them. I love to daydream, at home or at school. And daydreaming, I think, is normal. Everyone does it. But for me, it was more when I'm in a situation where I don't feel safe. Like when I was a child, especially with someone with a voice at me, I was always yelled at. And, if harsh was spoken over me, then I would zone out and only zone back in when whatever it was had ended. Another big thing was isolation during playtime as a child. My sister's sociable, and when it's time to go out and play with our friends, she'd be out there with them. And even if I went out, I would be in a corner somewhere. But I usually preferred to stay in the house and read, just alone. I'll sometimes close the door and I'll just somewhere, just hide in the corner and read. And I had severe anxiety. The anxiety actually was what caused, the throwing up and, the physical symptoms. Yeah. So, what led to my diagnosis was that, some of the symptoms started to affect my work. So in 2022, I was working in the public school system in Japan, in Tochigi Prefecture in the north of Japan. And I worked 4 days at an elementary school and 1 day at a junior high school. And, I was genuinely happy at both schools because The students were so sweet, and I still miss them. The staff was great. They were all very friendly, and they're lovely. We worked. I thought we worked well, and even when I left at 3 years, we were crying. Me and some of the teachers were crying because we had worked so long with each other. So I had a good bond with them, which is why I knew that the struggles I was facing were my problem. I've always had a harsh inner voice within me, critiquing every word or deed. This obviously directly affected my work. I was the assistant language teacher, so I was supposed to be the expert because I was the native English teacher, and we had the Japanese teacher of English in the classroom. So, I was always tense in any social setting, including work. My shoulders were always up, like I was waiting for something horrible to happen. However, the biggest reason I sought help from a psychiatrist was because I found myself zoning out during lessons. So I'll be in the classroom, team teaching, and I would suddenly lose focus, zone out. Like mentally, I would be gone. The next thing, the teacher will be asking me to maybe read something or do something in the class, And of course, I wouldn't know what the instructions were. I didn't hear them because I had zoned out. So again, that was directly affecting my work. And this actually, the zoning out happened at the junior high school. It happened at the junior high school. So, it was a big issue because it was work. Growing up, I did this often. I zoned out often, and years before actually being a Christian, I prayed about it, with my church group, and so I understood this was a wall that I had built to protect myself as a child. I thought I had overcome it at that point, but obviously it had surfaced in my 40s. So in my psychiatrist's office, as I opened up about, my struggles at work, I realized it was my colleague's voice that triggered my trauma response. He was the kindest person ever. We talked about our hobbies outside of work. He would show me around the school and show me like unique cherry blossom trees planted at the school. The different types of cherry blossoms, and he never raised his voice at me. So I was confused, like, why is this happening? So anyway, I later found out that I was having emotional flashbacks. Of course, in that session, I had no idea what emotional flashbacks were. I thought it was inattention because I was losing focus. So that's why I sought an ADHD diagnosis. So my psychiatrist started to ask me about my childhood experiences, and I didn't know where she was going with that because I thought, listen, I have inattention, I'm losing focus. But anyway, in that session, I began to remember things that happened in my childhood. See, I grew up in a dysfunctional home. My mom was a single mom. I grew up with my mom, my maternal grandparents, and my sister. I never knew my biological father. He was never in the picture. And so, I began to recall incidences like having to go and look for help from the neighbors in the early evenings, pitch black outside, because my grandpa had gotten his rifle and to shoot my grandma because they had a huge fight at the dinner table. And really, that was normal to see, I guess. Also from September 2022 to March 2023, I was trying to get tested for ADHD. In this particular session, my psychiatrist diagnosed me instead with CPTSD. And honestly, I am grateful for my CPTSD diagnosis because it's given me closure. Now I know that all the symptoms that I experience, they occur because of the changes that happened in my brain resulting from this trauma. And it's not because I'm flawed or a bad person. Well, thank you so much for listening to all of this, and I hope it helps you in some way. See you in the next video.